Okay, hello everyone, and happy New Year. And as Caroline said, happy Wednesday, and welcome to Refresh. As you know, this is our time to connect, to be inspired, to learn something, and just ultimately feel a bit better for this time spent together. And I have to say, if anything, the pandemic has taught us is spending time together is truly treasured time. And that's what Generation W is all about. And speaking of Generation W, 2022 is the year. April 1st, the day, I'm resolute about this, friends, when we will gather for the first time in 2 years for our annual thought leadership event in person. Connection is the theme and connection is the action. There's more to come, great speakers, provocative. I don't know, every time I think about Generation W this year, I just think about like all of these group hugs. But talk about a spirit refreshment and the opportunity to recharge and revitalize, to rethink, to learn, unlearn. April 1st, it is not a day for fools. It is a day for us at Generation W and connection. And just knowing that we were gathering today, I have to tell you, refresh my spirit. We're not even 2 weeks into the new year. And let me ask you, are you feeling a bit in the swirl already? I have to report that I have taken my turn in the barrel, a COVID New Year's present, and I'm thankfully on the other side. I've already gotten today a report of a dear friend and colleague who just tested positive. It's an ongoing, but I'm hopeful that the new data that we're seeing about the decline in cases will be happening soon. I know it's happening in certain markets and neighborhoods. And although, as everyone says, COVID is coming, it's coming to a friend near you. And I just continue to pray and hope that this is the variant that moves through and actually is the one that brings us to the other side of, I don't think we'll go back to the life we had, but we'll have a life anew and renew. And we'll probably be able to calm down and feel a little bit better. Because as we all know, COVID continues to be a great illuminator in ways unanticipated, right? We've got to see the gaps in our social safety nets. It's put a huge and well-deserved spotlight on the value of our frontline workers. I mean, there have been industries that have boomed. Of course, I can speak to the golf industry as it's a family industry, for example. Of course, being outside has been a real help, but it's been taken on by the youth and people have been getting really excited about the game in a way they haven't. Or how about digital streaming? Is there a conversation you don't have with a friend? Like, what are you watching right now? And then, of course, there are those industries that have been battered, like travel and hospitality. And this has all had a tremendous impact on our workplace, and it's changed, and it's continuing to change in ways unimagined, or perhaps some of it was imagined, but never really thought possible. I recall early in our conversations, I think we've done almost 60 shows since we started Refresh, and we always are in this process of trying to assess what's happening. It felt like being a towel in the dryer, like it, you know what I mean? You're being tossed about. And the swirl being this disorienting factor as we try to get our equilibrium. And so how do we get our equilibrium? Well, there's been thought leaders and great writers and thinkers who've been on the ground listening, learning, and reporting. And that's like our guest today, Caroline Fairchild. I am so excited, Caroline, that you are here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Because I am, as you know, such a fan of you and your work and have been for a long, long time. And are so happy that our community can have this time directly spent with you. Caroline's talent, I have to tell you, has always been what she has led with. And she's currently the editor-at-large on LinkedIn's global news team, reporting on the prominent voices, trends, and issues facing the future of work and diversity in the workplace. And when you think about LinkedIn and how many members there are there, the amount of incoming data that she has access to is really extraordinary. And the fact she makes such beautiful sense of it all and gives it back to us that makes us better and more informed. I'm just so grateful to her. Mm-hmm. She also happens to be the host of LinkedIn Live and the writer of Working Together. Working Together is one of the 10 most popular newsletters on LinkedIn. And she writes on how American workplace is transforming in a digital and diverse age. I know of great interest to all of us. I have to tell you that I have been one and continue to be one of the 230,000 plus people who get that newsletter. Caroline, I just thought when I got it that you were thinking, well, thank you, Donna. No, you've got a lot of people who are coming to you. Yeah. So here we go. We're gonna have this great conversation. Everybody be ready. Have your questions ready. This is always a community engagement. So we're going to start with our workplace. There's so many places to start, but hard to ignore this number that popped up recently, which was 4.5 million people left their jobs. We've all seen the news headlines, the Great Resignation, but I love that you have framed this idea of the Great Reshuffle.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, it's so great to be here, Donna. Thank you again for the opportunity. And I echo your sentiments. For those who are joining us, hello, thank you for taking the time. Time is precious right now. And I appreciate you taking the time to be with Donna and I today. I do want to hear your questions. And I also want to hear, if I may, what you guys are interested in learning about. I have a fresh year where I'm trying to figure out what I want to report and write about. So if there are topics that you're interested in or things that you're seeing in your workplace, let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for new ideas to hunt down. But Donna, to your question about the just sheer number of people who are rethinking their careers right now, first I need to say, as much as I'd love to take credit for the Great Reshuffle, that was actually a terminology that came from our CEO, Ryan Roslansky. And, there's a lot of buzzwords, Great Resignation, the Great Quit, the Great Reshuffle. But really what we're seeing is, I think, maybe earlier on in the pandemic, Great Resignation was the right way to think about it, because there were a lot of people who were burnt out, continues to be a lot of people who are burnt out. I just saw an article in the Journal today about just that. But that Great Resignation was a lot of people just quitting to quit because they didn't see another opportunity. I think at this point in the pandemic, what we're seeing is the Great Reshuffle, and how we think about that is, it's not just people quitting to quit, it's people changing industries, changing careers, because they're redefining what they want their career to look like and what their relationship is going to be like with work moving forward. And so, as you mentioned, Donna, we have a ton of data points on LinkedIn where we can see this happening in real time. And it's unprecedented how many people we are seeing, not just change jobs, but change whole industries, change career paths. And that, I think, is one of the silver linings of the pandemic, because it's, the light is always, the dawn is always darkest. What's the phrase?
Yes, the dawn is always darkest before the dawn.
All right. So I think we're at the dawn right now. I'm not just trying to rephrase that, because I'm just,
okay.
Yeah, I think we're approaching the dawn, and that dawn is coming from a lot of people who have felt a lot of grief, who have gone through personal loss, who have gone through career losses, et cetera, over the past 2 years. And now a lot of people are kind of waking up with a fresh mindset and thinking, what do I want to do next?
Right. Okay, what do I want to do next? Well, so there's so much that's tied in here, because it's so easy to fall prey to the headline or the little sound bite, right? A lot of people are changing industries because industries have been battered.
Sure.
Or they have been run in a way that's made it difficult to manage with your life, right? I think about hospitality industry so much. I think about restaurants, right? They're so vital to our society, to our culture, to so many different things. And yet the way restaurant workers have been treated in some cases, not all, has really led to part of the reason they've left, right? We have to ignore that we can't ignore that there's really messaging coming across in terms of work style and job descriptions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of some of those buzzy headlines, I saw one yesterday that says, the era is over for the jerk boss. Jerk bosses you can't, no one's putting up with that anymore. But to your point about how industries have shifted, and some of the industries that were hardest hit by the pandemic, that really is bearing out a trend that we were following prior to this crisis, which is people not necessarily thinking about their careers as, okay, this is my job title, this is the career ladder that I'm trying to follow, these are the companies that I want to work for, but actually thinking about their careers as skills, transferable skills that they can have in any industry upon any kind of disruption. And so really breaking down not just what your function is, but really what you're good at. There are things that restaurant workers are very good at, communication, customer service. These are things that are, Donna, we were talking about soft skills earlier this week, but these are things that are very transferable to other industries, and workers are starting to realize that. But more importantly, I think, is that hiring managers are starting to realize that.
That is the key, right?
I think hiring managers before this pandemic, most of them, for better or for worse, were looking for a very particular type of profile for what a successful candidate would look like in a role. And more times than not, the person who would look successful was a carbon copy of the person who had that role prior to them. And now, because of just the sheer number of open positions right now and the tight labor market that we're in, hiring managers are having to think more diversely about the talent that they're thinking about and how they're sourcing these jobs. And I believe that's going to be a boon for working women and other underrepresented groups in the workplace.
Yeah, and we want to talk, obviously we want to talk about working women, but I just, it's funny you asked for ideas and stuff. It just popped in my head is, in the sports industry, especially in the NBA right now, there's all of these stories about these players who never, they're either number 10, 15, or aren't even on a roster who are getting their shot. And they're making, it feels like Hamilton, just give me my shot. And they're making a difference and they're getting contracts. And I think it's a little microcosm about talent in the world, right? You are locked in behind people, or you're not seen in a different way. And when given opportunity, right? When hiring managers, when all of us look at the talent pool differently, perhaps we'll be richer in the end from that process.
Well, now all I want to do is take us on a tangent because I want to know what you think of Becky Hammon.
Oh, are you kidding? I mean, we can go on any tangent you want. I just want to be very clear. I love Becky Hammon. I had the privilege of being the president when she was one of our star players. My whole family adored her. She played at the Garden. I went to almost every one of her games. I loved her spirit. I loved her tenacity. I loved the fact that her and Pop created a connection and that Pop stood up for her, because there's a hiring manager who was able to just look outside the box. Right now it's more commonplace, but he led the way. And the interesting thing is I have a friend who's a huge fan of hers. And over the holiday, just recently, I wrote a note and said, I'm waiting to see Big Becky to be the first women's NBA coach. That day, she announced to sign with the WNBA. And I thought that, good for her, good for the league, good for everyone. She's really, really special.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. I think a lot of people are rooting for her to break that ceiling, but maybe it's just a comment on the ceiling is not necessarily quite tempered to be broken yet.
Maybe. I kind of read it. I think I think Mark probably gave her a really outstanding deal. And the fact that she would be a head coach of an organization probably would add merit, what I mean? And I think she does the other connection to give back, which is kind of, and pay it forward, which I thought was also great.
I love that interpretation. Good for her.
We can use that. We can use Becky as a way to transition to women in the workplace. Women have they have been in the swirl. They've been battered through this period of time. But you said, we're in the dawn. So what's it looking like? What are the trends for women in the workplace these days?
Yeah, so I think I don't know if you guys have the graphic back there.
Oh, we do. We'll put it up.
Of what's happening right now. Let's go to the one that shows kind of the drop in labor participation that we saw earlier in the pandemic. So there's one that's a bunch of squiggly lines.
Yeah, the one that's a little hard to read, but you'll talk.
Yeah, I'll walk you through it. Like everything on LinkedIn, everything data-wise, I just feel like it's a little touch and go. But so, all right, what are we looking at here? So a lot of squiggly lines, but the headline here is across the board, we saw female hires drop significantly across countries, especially when we compare it to female hiring rates of their male peers. So this data, it goes through July of 2020 and kind of shows what we saw at the beginning. And, I don't have to tell probably anyone, in this discussion why this happened, but of course it was just the perfect storm of childcare facilities closing down, people losing access to schools, flexible work being something that a lot of working women wanted in advance of the pandemic, but because of the emergency nature that a lot of workplaces were forced to implement flexible work, it wasn't working for a lot of women and they were unable to be fully present at work. And this looks at female hires. So this is really looking at how many women were thinking about changing jobs or applying for new jobs at this time. And if you can think about the mindset of most working women at this time, that probably felt dang near impossible for a lot of women. But in terms of what we're seeing, fast forward to 2021, particularly the latter half of 2021, we looked at something that we thought would be a indicator of how women are doing in the workplace at this point in the pandemic. And one of the trends that was really encouraging is, well, when we looked at promotion rates, right? So how women were moving up the career ladder, both within their companies and outside their companies. 2020 was a devastating year for promotion rates for women for reasons that we know are similar to what we just discussed. But when we looked at 2021, female promotion rates increased rapidly compared to male promotion rates. In fact, male promotion rates across the US were lower in 2021 than 2020, whereas female promotion rates saw a surge of something like 11%, which is huge from a statistical significance standpoint. And so what that tells us is that this shift in how people are thinking about talent, this shift in what companies are looking for, is really benefiting women, and it's benefiting them in a way that it's letting them get further in their careers. So that was exciting. I joke with my husband a lot that it's very rare that I get to write something positive. So anytime, it's actually funny. Sometimes I write a lot and I can't expect that my husband's going to read everything that I write, but sometimes I catch him and he'll say that he read my article or something. And I say, okay, what is it about? And if he hasn't read it, he'll be like, something bad with working women and it's not getting better. And that's his, and like nine times out of 10, he's right, which is sad. But in this case, he wouldn't have been right. And I think he did read this article. So that's good. And, we'll be following this trend moving into this year as well.
Well, let me follow up. Here's a question from Facebook. One of our very valued community members, Erin, says, definitely recognize the number of people shifting and shuffling. It doesn't seem like companies are widely reacting to the reasons people are reshuffling, though, like burnout. How does someone ensure they're not jumping from one burnout situation to another?
Oh,
and I would say this, in the bigger companies, there is a lot of talk, but the reality of moving a big company further has not changed. It is
right.
about really unbelievable amount of focus, time, sacrifice to compete in this marketplace. It is tough.
Yeah. Well, I think a lesson that comes from my own career that I've seen play out time and time again with my peers and, the leaders that I speak with is I think it's really interesting and also a huge miss that when you're applying for a new job at a new company, there isn't as much focus on who's going to actually be your manager. In fact, there are some cases where you can get through a whole interview process and not even meet the person who's going to manage you on a day-to-day basis. And so your point of like this top down, it's one thing if the CEO is saying something or the CHRO is saying something. Your individual experience at a company is going to be based almost, I would say 80% on who your manager is and how they work. And so, and to the question of like, how do you ensure you're not going from one burnout place to the other? I would ensure that you spend a lot of time with the person that you're going to be working for and understand, do they really understand these values, really get a deep sense for how they work and how they manage? Because, I think the phrase is something like people join companies, but they leave managers. They don't leave companies. So that's always something when I think back earlier on in my career, I'm like, why didn't anyone at the Career Center ever mention this? It was always like, oh, like go work for Google or go work for Facebook, work for a prominent company, but there was no emphasis on who's going to be actually managing you with that experience.
Caroline, she's amazing. She'll nurture you. Exactly. Go work. And I think that is an incredibly valid point. I've always said, go work with good people.
Yeah.
That is the difference maker. It's who you spend your time with. Right?
Yeah.
Katie, Tiffany, Glory, Kasha, Sherry, we're Tara, Taviana. This is the group we spend our time with.
Yeah, I think Sheryl Sandberg, said many years ago, if you get a seat on a rocket ship, doesn't matter what seat, just take it. And I would argue that that's not the best advice. I would say, if you get a seat on a rocket ship, doesn't matter what seat, just take it, but just make sure you have a good manager next to you is what I would say.
I would also hope that was a good pilot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, Erin, thanks for that question. If anyone has any other questions, please send them along. All right, we talked about things that are changing, what's going to stay, what's not. I don't know about you. After a while, you are in the swirl of putting information out there, and like if I read one more article about COVID, I'm going to get it again just from reading it. But that said, there's so much chatter about the workplace, and I saw a really great quote 2 days ago that said, we're never going back.
No.
There's some, but yet there's companies who are back. So what are you seeing? What are you hearing? You talk to so many people, and of course, then you know our lives.
Yeah, it's funny. Our chief economist, Karen Kimbrough, did a segment with 60 Minutes on Sunday about the future of work. And she said exactly that, Donna. She says, we're never going back. And that was a moment, just internally at LinkedIn where, tens of thousands of us kind of heard that. And we were like, oh, she might mean we, but she also means we, like she means LinkedIn employees are never going back to the way things were. And I think that is both encouraging, but also a little startling. I don't know about you, but when I got back to work after the holidays, thinking about another year, potential full year of pandemic working, I was just like, it's a little overwhelming to think about it. But I will say, when we have, leaders like Karen, other leaders like demonstrating, you look at what's happening in finance right now, where, even 6 months ago, a lot of these big banks were saying, you got to come back to the office and you got to be here a certain amount of days. And they're all, repelling on that. And I think it's one thing to focus on how that can be overwhelming and what that means for you in terms of how you can progress in your career. But I think it's another to think about how it could benefit you, how it could benefit your relationship with work. I mean, I saw there was a venture capitalist who posted on LinkedIn before the holidays. He calculated the amount of time that he spent commuting to and from the office, and also, traveling for work in, a given calendar year. And it was astronomical amount of time. And now you have that time to hang out with Lola, your dog, or you have time to, catch up and have actual, lunch with your partner, or exercise, or go for a walk outside. And so that's all things that I think are really beneficial. I think the question that we have to answer is, how do we ensure that as we move into this new model, that it is inclusive, that talent is being assessed and promoted and retained, regardless if they are in the office or not? And what are the systems in place within companies to ensure that people aren't falling behind as they continue to work virtually in many cases?
Right. And then there's another piece on top of that, which Marta just asked, and it always comes to my mind. What about culture? Because I will tell you that all the corporate leaders, business leaders, and not-for-profit leaders, I mean, underneath it all, yes, okay, fine. It is so difficult to maintain when you're not together.
Oh yeah, I remember early on in the pandemic, the first virtual offsite that we had, it was awful. We're all working in different time zones. It's really challenging to connect virtually. I joke, but maybe the metaverse will figure this out for us.
Okay.
No, but yeah, I do think that's something that is challenging, creating culture from a distance. But I think the best managers are taking that as, a reason for why they have to invest more in culture as opposed to less. I think the companies that are going to fall behind in the talent that's going to feel like they aren't connected to the mission of their company or what they're doing. Those are going to be the managers who kind of just say like, oh, it's too difficult. We can't create culture virtually. We're going to figure it out. We'll figure it out one way or another. I don't think that we figured it out yet, though,
I think some of figuring it out is culture has to be with people who are connecting. Now, listen, your friend and someone who I adore, Gail King. I saw you talk to Gail on CBS. I was so proud.
I love her.
She said last night on The Late Show, this is so great, Trisha Melly, thank you so much, that she would rather run buck naked in Times Square than go back to working at home.
I want to respond to that. But what I will say, going back to this theme of connection and this theme of the importance of being in person with people, I've had the pleasure of speaking to Gail, I think 5 or 6 times now. And the first time that I spoke with her, I think I had 5 minutes with her. She came into the green room and, 5 minutes with her before the segment, and then maybe a couple minutes after that. I learned more as a journalist in like the 12 minutes that I was physically exposed to the icon that is Gail King than I had in the preceding 6 months, hands down, like flat. Like I learned more about the craft that I'm trying to perfect just by being near her. And that's really hard to do virtually. I definitely didn't get that. At one point I was in California doing news hits with her like this. And, you know, you don't get that. So that's to the human connection. And yeah, it is challenging working from home. And I think, you know, I have to think about this a lot, particularly when I'm reporting on what virtual work means for people. I have it really good. I have this room, I have a home office. I can close the door when I'm done with work, and I can open the door when I want to be working. And it's this whole area. But think about the ones with young kids running around. Think about the Gen Zers who are in, like, particularly here in New York. I have so many Gen Z colleagues who are in apartments the size of this room, and they have roommates, and they're trying to work from home. So that, I think, in and of itself is something that we have to realize, that, you know, like Gail King, who I'm sure got really sick of doing her own lighting and her own makeup and having to do her own IT because she was alone. You know, there's that extreme, but then there's also the extreme of people who, like, simply cannot be productive working from home, full stop.
No, that's right. I mean, everybody has a space that feels like it's their space and that's comfortable. And you want to, and you know, offices have gone out of their way to continually upgrade that experience for employees.
Right.
I mean, I used to go to the Bloomberg's offices in New York, and I'm like, I just love being there. Right?
Yeah.
All the food,
Beautiful.
and the activity, it was beautiful space,
all the fish. Yeah. It was,
all
yeah.
of it was great. But let me just ask you this: what's one thing that you took away from Gail in those 12 minutes that just you're like, oh my goodness?
The sheer importance of having a genuine interest in people. You know, when she talks to you, she leans in and she looks at you in the eye. And after I had that conversation with her, I noticed how many times I'm in meetings with colleagues, how many times I'm, you know, virtually or not. And, you know, people are looking over here while they're talking to you, or, you know, you walk into the office and someone's like, hey, good morning, Caroline. And they're looking at their phone. And it was none of that. It was like little old me for the 5 minutes that we had prior to going on the segment. She was leaning in, she was looking at me, and I felt like I was the only person in the entire world. And she did that because she wanted to make sure that when we did go live, that I was comfortable. And I was comfortable, believe it or not. I mean, I was scared behind my panties the first time that I spoke with her. And I think that I've really tried to, in my own craft, you know, interviewing people, really demonstrate that, you know, I hear you, I'm listening to you, I have a genuine interest in what you have to say. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of journalists don't have that.
No, it's interesting. We're all distracted, but I will have to say your setup is particularly fantastic, because I feel like you are looking right at me. And one of the problems with Zoom is eye line, right? So you
Right.
are a box lower than my camera. So I feel like I am looking at you, but I probably don't look like I'm looking at you, right? And
well, this is a tip for everyone who is joining us. So this is my camera right here, right? Yeah. And well, now I made it all, hang on. So this is my camera right here. I have a little Post-it right next to my camera with an arrow, and I'm looking right at the camera. And it's challenging because I'm not looking at you, Donna, right now. But when I am talking, I'm giving the direct impression that I'm looking at you. I'm not looking down at the screen. So if you want to be a better presenter virtually, I encourage you to do the same thing. Just put a Post-it right next to it with an arrow and look at your camera. And then when the person in the meeting that you're speaking with is talking, you can look down.
That's so funny, because I thought you actually had a special LinkedIn gizmo that I was.
Oh, I do have like a professional camera setup, but I didn't have the time to set it up this morning. But yeah, okay. No, it's more you just look at the camera.
No, I know, but then I figured if someone sees me like looking at the camera and not looking at you, then it's a very strange phenomenon. Sherry and I, our crack producer, talk about this all the time. Anyway, we have some questions here.
Great.
And I do have to look off camera to do it because it's to the side. Thank you, Janet. Are organizations considering a hybrid model of in office for collaboration and home for detail work? Oh, that's interesting. So in other words, designating special job functions for where that activity is happening.
Yeah. So I have heard of a lot of companies trying to figure out, I'm going to botch the numbers, but so the Future Forum, which is a research consortium owned by Slack, did a survey late last year. And I think it was something like 75% of people want flexibility in where they work, but like 93% of people want flexibility in when they work. And the insight that came out of that is, you know, on a day-to-day, I'll get to like the in-person versus not, but on a day-to-day basis, is there a way that you can structure the workday? So there's like, quote, on hours and off hours. And so what that looks like at Slack in particular, and some other companies who are experimenting with this, there's a time period. Maybe it's 10 Eastern to 2 Eastern, where you're expected to be responding to emails, you're expected to be on chat, you're expected to be, available. Other than that, you can get your work done in your own time. And I think that has been a boon for a lot of companies. Here at LinkedIn, what we've done is that we've established no meeting Fridays. Think of that like detail work. So a lot of people can go heads down on Fridays and not worry about responding to messages or emails, et cetera. So a lot of companies are doing that, designating whole days where there's not going to be meetings. In terms of what that means for going into the office and not, I do believe that we're going to get to a place where, it's going to make sense for you to go into the office, 4 hours a day, maybe twice a week or something, and you do all of your in-person work, you have your connection lunch with colleagues, you meet with your manager in person, you do all of that in person. And then the rest of the stuff, because I don't know about you, Donna, but I now had the experience of going into the office and having a meeting where half of us are in the room together and then half of us are on the screen.
Yes.
And I just am like, I might as well be home. Like, I think unless everyone is in person and you have that connection of disconnecting from the virtual, it's not necessarily worth going into the office, because you're still having to interact with the people who are on the screen.
So I'll give you just a little more depth to that. So we have always had people work with us. Sherry in particular, she's out of Boston. Kosh is out of New Jersey, who have not been in our office. So our meetings, even pre-pandemic, were split. And so we actually were kind of used to that. And I would say, and so now that's never going to change for us, because it was never different before. It actually allowed us to expand our talent pool and engage with people who we've been involved with for a long time. But when the meeting's over, we still have that group that's there. And I find a tremendous amount of productivity and connectivity in that time that we would give up otherwise if we weren't together. Mm-hmm. Just to give you just another perspective.
Absolutely.
Because we're a small team. It's not like we're a huge global entity. We're a small team, but there are members of our team that do not work with us, and on a regular basis we have to speak with them. And so Absolutely. It's funny, we see that as the norm, not as an exception.
Yeah, no. And, I go back, I think about, earlier on in my career, at one point I was one of the only editors for our team based out of California, and I would be the only person virtually. And I think that I felt very disconnected. And so I do think that as virtual work becomes more of the norm, as, half the people are virtual and half are in the office, it's going to democratize both how you're able to show up in that meeting, what you're able to contribute, but how you're viewed in terms of what you're participating in and what you're giving to the organization. I think I felt handicapped, several years ago when I was the only one virtual. And I think that the days of that are long gone.
Yeah, which is also really nice. It's really funny. I didn't really reflect on the fact that we've been doing that for really quite a while. And it was just kind of our normal. It wasn't different, because it's always what we've been doing. Let me just tell everybody, welcome. We're with, today is our New Year opening refresh. We couldn't be happier to celebrate with Caroline Fairchild, who is the editor at LinkedIn, and just an amazing talent, thinker, doer. Her career is inspiring. Before we go, I want to talk to you a little bit about your career, because all of us are always interested in how somebody else does it, and also what's happening in the media. But you did provide us these 3 great reshuffle tips, and why don't we take a look at them and talk about them a little bit?
Oh, wow. Look at that impressive slide.
Wow. Yes, of course. You made it. Come on.
Yeah. So thinking, I can just run through these really quickly, and would love, if anyone has any questions about particular ones, we can dive in. But I think when we think about the reshuffle, I think the first thing to think about is that now is really a great time to rethink your career. And more importantly, employers know that too. And the reason that I included that, and employers know that too, is that you also, workers have a lot of leverage right now. If you're a high performer on your team, if you're someone that is seeking to get promoted, get paid more, get more responsibility, now's the time to have that conversation with your manager, because they understand that if they lose you, if you go somewhere else, replacing you is going to be very, very challenging in this labor market. So I think if we had this conversation 3 years ago, it was definitely, you know, the employer's market when it comes to what's going on with talent. But now I think talent is really in charge right now. So if you are thinking about leaving, there's a lot of people who I'm sure would love to have you on their team. But also, you know, if you're thinking about what you could do internally to up-level yourself in your career, having a conversation with your manager right now, I think is the perfect time to do that. It's funny.
There is a question on that. So before you go to the next one, let me just jump in. Right. Julie wants to know that for those faced with having to refresh their career, how do you manage the delicate balance of being employed, but also in search of the next career?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. She didn't say the next job. She said the next career. So, you know, I'm not sure if you're just thinking of making an industry switch or I guess refreshing, whatever it is.
Well, on the lighter side, if you are working virtually, looking at job listings, applying for other jobs, taking interviews is much easier virtually than when you're in an office and you're having to figure out how to balance that. But I think more practically in terms of if you're, you know, just stepping into the waters of, you know, maybe I do want to change industries, maybe I do want to change whole career paths. There's so much amazing content online. Like I think I have to give a plug to LinkedIn Learning because I work at LinkedIn. But you know, between you and me, I just got masterclass for Christmas, and I am taking a course in communication with Robin Roberts. I'm taking a course in.
Robin. I know.
Robin. She's so inspiring. I'm taking a course on writing to be heard. I'm taking a course on makeup with Bobby Brown. And am I going to become a makeup artist? No. But the point of that is that there's so many resources, and also I've scheduled it into my day. So I have a 45-minute block every day where I'm trying to focus on ways that I can reskill myself, learn more things, and kind of open my mind to new ideas. And I think if you can schedule that time into your day to think about how you can use resources like Masterclass or LinkedIn Learning or whatever online course platform you're interested in, there's so many great ways to just little by little. My favorite Peloton instructor likes to say little by little amounts to a lot. And I think, rather than thinking, oh my goodness, I have to change my career overnight or have to figure it out in a day, just start exploring new ideas. And once you figure it out, there's so much appetite for talent, innovative talent to make a shift.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. A little by little creates a lot.
Yeah.
That's how I feel when I eat donuts.
Yeah. That's how I feel when I'm like, oh, I'm just going to do a 10-minute workout. I'm like, little by little, exactly amounts to a lot. Exactly.
Be 100 tomorrow. Okay, go ahead.
Empathy. Yeah. So this isn't something that I've been talking about a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people in this event have heard about as well. But I've been interviewing CEOs and business leaders since I started my career at Bloomberg with the nice offices in the Fish, and I think I can count on one hand, maybe two, the number of times I ever heard, particularly a CEO, use the word empathy in an interview, or when I ask about leadership and management, when I ask them what they look for when they're hiring, when I ask for how they would describe themselves as a leader. And then the pandemic hit, and it was like, I told one of my producers, I was like, I wish we could, aggregate all of our scripts from our shows and just keyword search for empathy. I'm sure it was gangbusters. It was everywhere. And that really gets to the theme of how the pandemic forced companies to not treat their talent like robots that power up and down every time that they leave and come to the office. They had to start thinking holistically about mental health, about physical health, about how their employees were feeling about the job at hand. And so what that's led to is, if you just Google search when we get off this call, empathy and leadership, there's going to be HBR articles. There's going to be tons of things that tell you that empathy is really what a lot of people are looking for in leadership. And I think that's going to be, I think it's great. I think it's great.
It's so interesting because we talk about soft skills and for so long, I mean, thank goodness younger women haven't had to hear it as much as perhaps I have had to hear it, others my generation. How empathy is a soft skill. It doesn't get you further, right? You can't be your true empathic self because that is not a business skill. And yet I've heard Deepak Chopra be speaking about this 15 years ago. and
Right.
talking about why soft skills are the future of work and connection and productivity. And so I can't tell you how warming it is. And not only is it great for women, but it's also great for men who, many of them are very empathic and have been encouraged to really tamp down those
Right.
softer skills that they had. And so now
Right.
there's this real movement for real fuller expression of human connection, which I think, I'm sure there's a lot of LinkedIn data about how that creates so much more productivity in people's lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, two things come to mind based on what you just said. Full stop, empathy is something that I think every person who's in senior leadership is looking for from their talent. Well, the rub there is, though, is that there was a headline that and some research that came out of, I think the journal did it, but I don't know what source they used to get the information. It demonstrated that, office housework, the taking of the notes, the DE&I efforts, the organizing of the virtual birthday parties, like women were still taking on more of that in the pandemic than men. And so I think what I will caution people who are thinking about how empathy can get them further in their career is ensuring that they're being empathetic when it comes to their leadership style, but not necessarily in just volunteering for work that is not necessarily going to get them ahead. I remember before the pandemic, I noticed that like all the baby showers, all the birthdays were being hosted by the women in the office. And so, when it came to, my colleague Susie baby shower, I tapped my colleague Alex, who's a man, and I said, you want to organize this one? And he said, sure. And I think there needs to be more of a conversation about those things that make an office culture run, how making sure that they're equally distributed across both genders.
That's great. And we have to feel comfortable as women in giving some of that stuff up. I feel as women, this is what we do.
Oh, yeah.
Hold on to it. And it's almost like that in parenting as well, as opposed to giving it to a spouse or a male colleague. There is a dynamic there that we tend to hold on to things more than we probably should, which helps perpetuate perhaps a position we may not want to be in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the last one, you said women are the future of work. And in that, you also sent us this graphic about the gender makeup of some of the jobs that we have. So I thought maybe we'd throw that up. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I did an analysis, it looks like this data is from November of last year. So pretty recently, just looking at the Csuite titles where we still see women dominating versus men. So I'm sure that this data is not going to be surprising to most of the people on the call, but majority of chief diversity officers, communication officers, HR officers, people officers, it continues to be women. But if we go to the other slide that I provided that shows some of the trends when it comes to titles that are dominated by men, there are some silver linings. And one of them happens to be with chief financial officers. So increasingly, we're seeing chief financial officer roles filled by women. And that's great for a lot of reasons. But so here, this, I think it's up a significant amount year over year. And sure, it's still just 34% of chief financial officers that are women, but the increases have been pretty significant over the past few years. And the reason that is because the role of the chief financial officer is changing. It used to be the chief financial officer was viewed as someone who would report on the numbers, whereas, the reporting that I've done, now a lot of companies are thinking of the chief financial officer as someone who can, paint a strategy and a picture for how the numbers should be influenced moving forward. And that's been a boon for women who, have, talents that allow them to think more whole picture, to tell a narrative. And so I think that that's been great. And then, I think obviously this shows that we have a lot of work to do. Chief technology officers, only 7% of them in the US are women. Chief executive officers across the board, predominantly men. But again, based on all the trends that we've discussed during this discussion, one can only hope that these numbers are going to start to move a little bit more rapidly in the other direction.
Right. And I'm going to ask you a question to take us off with, but based on those numbers, I'm sure you have some data. Which of those C-suite roles is the primary feeder or the most popular, if you will, feeder to a CEO role? And it might be interesting to see that. I don't know if I'm sure that's been done, right?
Yeah, it's definitely the CFO. So that's why it is doubly encouraging that we are seeing more women, because we think that that's going to be the pipeline to more female talent take over the CEO role as well.
So as we conclude this conversation, and of course, as highly as my expectations were, you always exceed them. Why don't you leave us with, you said this is the dawn. You
Right.
actually, I'm going to have to call your husband and tell him you were incredibly positive. We had great news about moving forward.
You will have to call him.
I know, we're going to have to just tell him that. But, I think our community, I'm looking at some of the questions and the feedback is, where do you want to leave them in terms of thinking about their jobs, and also not only theirs, but their friends, their daughters, whoever it is, in terms of the prospects of the workforce as we leave COVID? COVID's done, guys. I mean, yes, people are still getting it. We want people not to get very sick, but COVID's going to move on. Where are we going to be?
Well, shameless plug that I just put into the chat. If you want to continue this conversation with me, Working Together is published every Wednesday. It's usually published in the morning, but I'm late today. I blame the holiday hangover for not having published again this morning, but I usually publish every Wednesday. And then we go live every Thursday at 3 Eastern, talking about a lot of the issues that Donna and I have been discussing. So I'd love for you to join that community. In terms of what I'm seeing moving forward and the positive trends, I think that, going back to what we discussed, we're not going back. And what that means, particularly for women in the workforce, is that a lot of the things that were thrown under the rug, a lot of the, issues that, some corporate leaders were seeing as side issues, like diversity and inclusion, like, culture. I think these are all now table stakes. And because they are table stakes, and because there's so much emphasis right now on inclusion and on inclusive cultures, one can only hope that a lot of the issues that women have faced in the workplace in the past are going to start to mitigate. And so that's what I hope to write about more moving into 2022. And yeah, I'm just excited to cover this issue for another year.
And fantastic. So I just want to, here's just some of the notes I wrote down, because I always write down notes. I love this when you said, take the time to reskill yourself. I take 45 minutes. That's what you said. And all the ways that you did it. I think your makeup looks amazing. I love Bobbi Brown.
Thank you.
For a long time. And she is amazing, but you can see it and it's fantastic. The idea that our careers, every career has skills that are transferable. I have this conversation with young people all the time. And it's so hard, especially women, to say, well, I do this. This is my box. No. You have skills that are transferable. Really, really, really important. And I love the fact that you're saying female promotion rates are up. We're in the dawn, right? And a little by little creates a lot. We have to thank your instructor for that one, because every little step gets amplified along the way. Caroline Fairchild, it is so great to be with you. Thank you so much, everyone. Listen, a great recommendation is to sign on to our newsletter. Like I said, I get it every Wednesday, and I'll be really pissed today because it's late.
I know. I'm mad at myself.
Are you kidding? The chance to have this conversation is wonderful. For all of us, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Now we're back on our regular bi-weekly, is that right? Bi-weekly? Every 2 week schedule. And April 1st, also mark your calendars for Generation W 2022. The Connection, you'll start hearing about some of our great speakers and topics that we're taking on. We are so incredibly excited. Of course, the University of North Florida is our partner, and we will continue to partner with them. Register now. So until we see you, thank you so much. Thank you again, Caroline. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you so much. All right. Happy Wednesday. Bye.
Happy Wednesday. Bye-bye, everyone.